back to Second Floor Experience, everyone. We are in a very special studio right now and with a very special guest, Matt. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
We were just talking to you upstairs. We're kind of doing this cool business idea with some other people that we know, got connected, and you're like, hey, come by my studio so graciously. And so, I mean, fair to say this is like the sickest place we've ever been.
Yeah,
Ever.
100%.
This
Yeah.
is so cool.
The vibe in here is...
It's a sleeper build. Like
Yeah,
you would not
definitely.
know from the outside.
It's a Honda Civic.
So, I mean, I'm sure you're probably tired of people saying this, but you built Joe Rogan's podcast studio. Super sick. You built Alex Hormozy's podcast studio shortly after, and then you've gone on to do a bunch of other really, really cool stuff too.
Yeah.
And you pretty much went, you were telling us that you went pretty much from working a regular job to the pandemic happened. And then I thought, in my head, I was like, oh, okay, you know, you've been doing this for a while, you work your way up, and then somehow you get introduced to Joe Rogan. But you were like, no, he was my first client. So that blew my mind. And then just to kind of set the scene, because I want to hear you tell it too, that you went from a job and then you quit, or you got fired, or you got furloughed or something during the pandemic, and you were like, I want to go work for myself now. And you'd been in I'm assuming the AV industry for 10 years, and then you basically built your way up into set design and then GCing entirely.
Yep.
So can you just kind of like briefly walk people through that didn't hear our conversation earlier?
Yeah. It wasn't part of the plan. There wasn't really a plan in like kind of like the idea of what I was pursuing. It was really just being in a place of scarcity. It was a layoff, and I don't know, like a lot of people get backed into a corner, they typically panic, and their first inclination is like, oh, I'm going to go and get a job, and I'm going to spend time just having to like work my way up the ranks again. And I don't know, man. At that time, the world was so weird. You didn't know what to expect. Nobody knew what this thing was going to be. Like, everybody thought COVID was one of two things. They thought it was not that serious, and nobody was really giving it too much thought. And other people were just over-indexing how like bad they thought it was going to be. You have the doomsday preppers all. So it's like you lose your job, and like I did, and I was just trying to navigate what I wanted to do next because there weren't a lot of options at the time. And I thought I had found a really good opportunity with the company I was with at the time. So losing that job was very polarizing for me. I was like, oh, well, how am I going to have to go through this process again of finding something I really loved, and like, and the world's shut down right now.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really an option for me. I was just like, I'm going to do my own thing. I knew what skills I had, and I knew that like it would incrementally grow. And that was the plan. The plan was, I'm going to use my skills, find people who need TVs hung on the wall, or anything that had to do with home AV or whatever it was. And I had sold my recording studio too, which I don't know if that would do any good anyways with the pandemic. But so that wasn't really an option for me as well with the revenue. So I just decided, okay, I'm gonna just go all in mentally. I was prepared, and then lo and behold, 2 weeks in, I get the call from a buddy, and that was it. Introduced me to Joe, and it was really an opportunity for me to challenge myself, not necessarily see it as the biggest client in the world. It was more or less like, what was I going to bring to the table in terms of value? But I had to define that really quickly. I didn't have the option of, like you said, like taking it slowly, being in the red for years, filing for bankruptcy a couple times. Like it was very non-conventional in the sense of business and growth and expansion, because I didn't have the tools necessary, and not physically, but just the resources with a team. I didn't have the knowledge of how to work in the industry, how to take care of my finances, how to understand the client's needs, and really just navigating conversations for building a relationship with clients. I had done sales before, but it was for a company that I knew the product. I knew what it was that we were trying to accomplish. This was just having to intently listen to the client and decide, okay, am I fit for this? And to be quite honest, I didn't really think about it much. I was just like, I guess I am. So I was like, he trusts me, and I'll just do it. So, and that was the catalyst for kind of starting my entrepreneurial journey was just betting on myself. You know, it's such a cliche to say it that way, but I knew I wasn't going back
Yeah.
to working for anybody else. So.
And you were telling us earlier that this was 2 weeks after you had started this business
Mm-hmm.
that you basically took on Joe Rogan as a client, and you said you hadn't really listened to many podcasts, so you were like, oh, I know this guy's, I know he's big, but like, did you know kind of how big he was, or?
No. I mean, it's hard to understate my knowledge of the like entertainment industry,
Okay.
but I don't. Prior to that, I didn't spend. I don't really watch UFC.
Okay.
I'm not really into sports. I'm not really into podcasting as a whole.
Yeah.
And to be quite honest, at that time, podcasting was just starting to become prevalent.
True.
For people who were kind of experimenting with it.
Yeah,
So it
true.
wasn't on my radar. In the AV industry, you think things like House of Worship for big sound systems. You
Yeah.
think about amphitheaters. You think about performing arts centers. You think about audio and video in like commercial buildings and like, bands, things like that. But podcasting is just, for what it looks like on the surface, a camera, a guy behind a microphone, and they're just talking about God knows what.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so it wasn't really like, a lot of people weren't talking about podcasting as an untapped industry. It just happened to be there. And so I had friends who would always tell me, hey, I listen to podcasts. And for a while, I didn't even know really what that meant. Like, I was like,
Yeah.
No
like,
way.
as far as a podcast goes, I guess it's just, at that time, I was like, okay, it's just someone talking about subject matter that they're just talking in front of a mic. And my first interaction with podcasting was before Joe. I was just doing some consulting work with a company here that was editing podcasts for Dell, the company, and their internal sales podcasts and things like that. So that was the first time I actually spent any time listening to audio podcasts, because I had to, fix some of the audio and stuff. So, and it didn't excite me. It's like, oh, okay, this isn't as cool as recording a band and mixing a band or whatever it is. It's just, this is easy. I could do this in my sleep, get it done.
Yeah.
So my first inclination when I heard it was Joe was, I just knew him from Fear Factor. and to be quite honest, I got a lot of heat on a podcast I did about a month and a half ago in the comment section, because I'm stating it the same way I'm stating right now. It's not that I didn't know who he was. I just only knew him from Fear Factor.
Yeah, so you didn't really know like how big
I didn't
he
know.
really was.
I didn't know how big he was. I didn't know his net worth. I didn't know that he was just huge in the zeitgeist of podcasting. I just knew he was a celebrity to some degree, and I was going to go meet with him to build a studio. It didn't really.
So crazy.
Yeah, it didn't matter to me what type of studio. I just knew that I could pull it off because of my experience. But yeah, I didn't know what I was getting into.
And they were giving you heat because you didn't
They
know that, or?
The comment section was acting like my syntax led them to hear I didn't know who Joe Rogan was. That's not what I said.
Gotcha.
I said I didn't know he was a podcaster. I didn't listen to Joe Rogan. I just knew him as a celebrity. So a lot of people were like, "Does this guy live under a rock?" I was like, that's
Honestly,
not...
I think I was the same way though. I didn't really listen to podcasts at all until 2020.
The same.
And,
Yeah.
or Joe
Yeah.
Rogan, like his podcast.
Yes.
Yeah, I knew he was
Dude,
in
it
UFC,
was about
like,
2020 that
yeah.
we
Right.
started
That's
watching
actually crazy.
UFC.
I never
and all this
realized
stuff.
that. But
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, it was such a new industry, and we tapped into it. That's really what it is.
Do you think like not really knowing about him helped you? Because I feel like, some people might have met him and been like, "Oh my gosh, Joe Rogan! Oh my gosh!" But you were like, "Oh, what's up, dude?" Like,
Yeah, that's
Can I build you a
That
studio?
was pretty much the interaction.
and I feel like people like Joe Rogan who probably get those interactions daily or whatever are refreshed when they meet someone like you who's down to business. I can get this thing done for you. Or, like, I'm confident enough in myself to figure it out. And you got introduced by someone, so you had kind of that referral trust going on. And so do you think that maybe helped you?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about people of that status and that caliber, yeah, it's easy to have yes man who surround you, and we're not LA. At the time, we didn't have as many people transplanting to Texas that were that high visibility. You know, we had like Matthew McConaughey. We had a couple people that, you know, kind of Bill Murray like hangs out downtown and people like that. And you also think about it this way: a lot of people live their lives with one of their aspirations meeting a famous person. I never understood that. I don't have idols. I don't have people. Even when I played music, I never had a guitar player that I looked up to or a band that I would go crazy for if I got to go see them play. Like, it was just, these are just people. You know, it's a statement you hear all the time. It's just, they're just people that, you know, they appreciate. Everybody has that origin story, right?
Yes.
So you get a little bit more and more disconnected from that as you become wealthy, as you become famous, as things transpire in your life, and you're no longer at that state of being with like your friends or people you came up with. You're now elevated, so it's hard for them to understand. Like, I know that's generalizing. I'm just saying it's probably harder to have a genuine interaction with somebody who, again, isn't looking to gain anything other than a connection, right?
Yeah.
And so, to your point, I'm sure Joe appreciated that. For me, I didn't hold him to this high regard or in reverence of being a famous person.
Yeah.
It was an opportunity for me to like have my first client. It just happened to be Joe Rogan, you know? So
the
like,
biggest podcast in the world. Yeah.
right.
That's so
Which,
funny.
to your point, started, like him having a studio here started the migration from LA to here. Like Tom Segura, and you have all these people that are his friends that are now here that all then happened to start podcasts. Or I know Tom probably had his before, but like they were all getting into that, realizing that that was the thing to do, and it was more collaborative versus competitive. And so it's like that sort of fell into your lap, not, you know, as if you didn't have 10 years of work in the AV industry, but in a sense it fell into your lap too, because it, you know, if you hadn't been that person to say, you know what, I'm gonna put my boots on and work, like I'm gonna figure these things out, like you were telling us upstairs, how many times you were like, can I do this? I don't know. I'm gonna figure it out. You know, 3 days of research later, you have a freaking hood vent or something that you might be putting in for someone. Like, there's a quote from, I think, Thomas Edison that says, like, most people miss opportunity because it comes in overalls and dressed in overalls and looks like work. And I think that's something that I've seen a lot, where even some of my friends or some people that I know, I'm like, dang, like that could have been it for you, you know? But you took it and you went, and look at this, look where you're at now.
Yeah, no, and it's great. I had a dinner. I host a dinner every month with other dads who happen to be business owners and entrepreneurs, and we were talking about this. We were talking about how in the infancy phases of starting a business or determining what your why is for anything, intuition's there. You know, purpose is going to be the biggest thing that you're searching for in that. You know, you want to know, what am I really good at? What am I proficient at? What drives me? What makes me really excited? But if you look at anything you do, you know, the investment of time you put into it has to be in alignment with sustainability in mind. You know, how much time are you going to do this over and over and over again? And what are you going to learn from that? And if you learn something about yourself that you don't necessarily like, are you going to be able to kind of move through that, do some of the work? And as a business owner or entrepreneur, in those infancy phases, like, you kind of see it at face value, right? People are looking at quantifying their success through the financial gain.
Yeah.
They look at it with status. They look at it with like the things they can own and accumulate.
Yeah.
And I never really saw it that way. I saw it as more of a worthiness type of thing. Like, am I gonna be good enough moving through this every single time I hit a new challenge? And that's a me versus me type of mentality. And I think as men, we spend a lot of time not considering how we feel about things, because we're driven by everything, like being a provider.
Yeah.
We're driven by, you know, how are people going to perceive me if I don't, you know, do this, or if I show vulnerability.
Yeah.
And so in everything I did with building the business, those were questions that were always in the back of my mind, but I didn't spend enough time like bringing them to the forefront of my why. And I think that's probably the most valuable thing I was learning throughout the whole process, was like, okay, if I'm challenging myself, how am I showing up, and how am I kind of inspiring too, because nobody can really do a business alone unless it's something very specific.
Yeah.
And what we do, I was like, man, I need a team. You know,
Big
like I
time.
realized very quickly that you know, it's the sum of all parts, and you have to be a leader. You have to be able to delegate, and in some ways you have to dictate everything that goes on around you. And like, you don't want to be the bad guy. You don't have to be the bad guy, but like, but to answer your question, it's a lot of consideration, man. It's a lot of considering. When I first started this, it was the biggest ask of anybody's career is to start at that caliber. And then have to figure it out retroactively and be like, oh my God, this is it's a wild ride, man. Like,
Had you thought of starting a business before that time?
I did. I had started a recording studio in
You mentioned that.
Yeah, in my early 20s, I was kind of tired of playing music, being in bands, like doing small tours and things like that. And I didn't really, I had a passion for music for a long time, but I think it was really driven from not really loving music, but really just the affirmation of being on stage. And it made me feel like, oh man, like I'm relevant, I'm cool, like I'm somebody. And that burnt out really quick. So I was like, how can I kind of do something outside of having to be with 4 other guys constantly, you know, being responsible for showing up to practice and like, you know. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to just build a studio. And I had no idea what I was doing. I just rented a storage unit and built it in the storage unit and then rented another one and then started building different rooms in this climate controlled storage facility.
Oh my gosh.
Ran cabling between all of them.
Dang.
Put like, and I the construction was subpar at best. You know, it wasn't, I didn't.
You were in your 20s?
I was 21 when I conceptualized it, and by 22 it was like finished essentially.
How old are you now?
I'm 37.
Oh my
crap,
gosh.
dude,
So
what?
it's like, yeah.
I would not have guessed that.
Yeah, and I was basically, that was my first business, but it was just a hustle. Like my whole life has just been a series of hustles.
Yeah.
You know, like, and I think to the core that is entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
You know, you're spending a lot of time finding a problem or trying to make money or, you know, trying to do something that's exciting and different. And, you know, they have serial entrepreneurs who are just constantly wanting to jump into business to business. I don't think that's a healthy model for being an entrepreneur. But at the time, I was building the catalyst I need, or the calluses I needed to, like, fail a couple times, get back up, not, like, get over the fear of not knowing everything. And so building the studio was exciting. And it wasn't having a studio. It was just the process of, like, the concept and then bringing it to life. The one thing was, like, I never had the courage to go all in back then.
Okay.
So I always justified it as, oh, it's a side hustle. Oh, I just spent, I think I probably had cumulatively like $120,000 worth of equipment at the age of like 24, 25, microphones, all this stuff. And I would always justify it by being like, no, I just need another mic. Like, it's going to sound, these drums are going to sound better if I just buy this $2,000 microphone. It's like, and I don't know. It was fun for what it was, but to answer your question, it wasn't a business in hindsight. It was just something that I did to justify my relevance. I was like, oh man, this is cool. This is who I am at my core. I love music, and I have a studio, and like everybody appreciates it, and look what I accomplished, and that's, I don't know. That's a dangerous thing, you know. Like something drives somebody for whatever reason, and at the time I thought it was cool. I thought it was like a fun thing to do, and I was making a little extra money on the side until it was 2 rappers a week, and I was like, God, this sucks. You know, it's like the worst. I'm not saying they weren't talented, but I was just dealing with rappers over time. You're kind of like,
That'll drain you, man. That'll drain you.
I was so drained, man, and I was just like, I'm not part of this culture in the sense that, you know, the subject matter over time, I'm looking at myself, I'm like, I'm 30 years old now. And I've never smoked weed, believe it or not. So I've got these rappers dealing weed out of my studio. Some of them come strapped with, you know, firearms and like...
They show up an hour late and you're like, dude, I can't.
They show up an hour late and I just... Yeah, man, I think I always had that entrepreneurship, you know, spirit.
Yeah.
But it was the pandemic that pushed me over the edge and realized I was like, man, I got to do this.
So, what you're doing now, right? Would you say that this is probably like the closest thing to your dream? Like,
Ooh, I'm still defining that, man.
okay.
Okay,
like-
here's a different question. So you said it's dangerous to put your identity in things like the hustle. Like you put your identity in, oh, I have a studio, oh, I'm a musician. Why do you think that's dangerous?
Because it limits growth. You know, like as humans, we're not here to work within parameters of what other people perceive us to be or who we think we are, what we can accomplish. Like growth comes with challenge, you know, adversity. It comes with falling on your face, and like you have to learn more and more about yourself, no matter how ugly it is. You know, so if you define yourself by one thing you do, it's hard to get out of that. It's you put a lot of store in who you are based on what you create for yourself. And then it's easy to have that tunnel vision and say, well, this is my identity, this is who I am, and I'm only going to focus on this. And anything that challenges that becomes a threat to the way I live. And this is why you have people who don't understand. This is why we have a bipartisan system too.
Yeah.
You know, like it's so over-indexed on both sides because you're protecting a belief, something that you hold dear, and it's something that you can't get beyond because in your mind it's the right thing.
Right.
Whether it's religion, whether it's spirituality, whether it's business, politics. And so I learned a long time ago, if I continue to define myself by the things I have, by the things I do, by my accomplishments, then I'm ignoring my own deficits. I'm ignoring the things that I could be working on to like grow and find new things about myself that I can actually control and other people can quantify and see, wow, like I can see that growth. I can see, you know, you're more compassionate, you're more patient. And I was putting so much store in that. Like, oh, I have a studio.
Okay.
Oh, like I have $120,000 worth of equipment.
Yeah.
Oh, like, and so like to your point, the dream is hard for me to define because I feel like I have more peace in my life now that I'm finding purpose in other things and not my accolades and my career and owning this studio or owning this company.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you know, I have a daughter now and she's 9 months old, and I look at that as like, oh, I have a way to steer this, you know, purpose in a way that serves something more than me. It's like I don't have to, like the money doesn't mean anything. The things I buy doesn't mean anything because like she's never going to see that. She's never going to understand that. She's never going to feel the impact of my own insecurities as long as I show up.
Right.
And so my dream, I think it's good for those things to change over time because your life changes over time. The people who are in your life change over time. And I don't want to limit that ever, you know?
So can you give an example? You said, like, I was spending all this time hustling when I should have been spending, I see now that I'm older, more value in doing things that helped me grow to be more compassionate, etc. Can you give like an example of like what that would be or what that has been for you?
Yeah, I've seen it impact my relationships. I spend a lot of time, especially in the industry I work in. You know, you work with a lot of cynics. You know, I remember I worked in IT for a couple of years, and believe it or not, IT network developers, people like that, they like to drink. You know,
Really?
and you know, when I said earlier, you're the sum of all parts. Like what you introduce to your life. You know, I spent a lot of time with people who kind of relished in their like misery, and that became me to a certain degree. Like I would get really annoyed with people. I would never really have a lot of patience, and it's something I'm always working on. But it's impacted a lot of my relationships, and I see it's impacted me too, because like there's always that saying where it's like your own worst enemy or your biggest critic, and that's part of being compassionate too. It's like you have to be compassionate with yourself, and I've seen that growth in myself too, where it's like my reactions to things now are a lot more subtle than they were before. You know, if I felt like I was failing at a business or a relationship, it would be so compounded. It would feel like the weight of it would make me just react in a way that wasn't healthy and like unsustainable, you know? And now, you know, it's really a lot of things in my life, you know, and the business and my daughter and the people that I love, like those things are sacred, you know? And entrepreneurship was one of those things that kind of pushed me to the limit of like understanding myself. And like the purpose is, I mean, that's so valuable. Like most people don't sit there and ask the question. I never did. You know, my life kind of imploded in on itself, you know, in the past year. And I had to really like, I struggled to have to like turn that around and understand it's like, okay, these decisions I still made, regardless of being at a place where I was like still, you know, navigating the why. But I don't know, man. I think sometimes we take life too serious, and sometimes we don't also give enough grace to ourselves for like wanting to just, I don't know, be human. You know, it's like people, we live in this like society where we want to feel important.
Yes.
People want you to feel like you're the boss. People want you to, you know, be like, oh yeah, I'm getting my job done, and that's so important. It's like at the end of the day, it's like you go home, you do what you enjoy doing, you know, whether it's spending time with your family or a hobby or sports or watching TV. It's like there's no wrong way to live unless you're blatantly doing something to just like destroy yourself or your body or people. Like, you know, and even then, you know, you have to question, you know, parameters of right and wrong. But for me, man, like business was something that I think helped me discover more about myself, both the like the ugly things too, and like where I needed to kind of be better for myself and the people that I care about. So hopefully that answered that question.
It seems like some people, I feel like I've been guilty of this, but people will kind of wait to figure out their why before they take any action.
Yeah.
Right? And so I guess for you, did you feel like you knew what your why was at all when you started your business?
No, not at all. And that's to the detriment. Like that was the polarity. That's the contrast of it, right? Like I see people who spend so much time being analytical about their why, and they never take action. To your point, like they never take action, and then so they're stuck in this mindset of I'm not worthy, I can't do this because like I haven't really defined my step by step. You know, there's people who really need a plan in their lives, and that's not wrong. It's just that they haven't really their expectations are kind of out of line with like what they're actually setting forth to actually get there. So like they may have an idea of the person they want to be, or you know, like where they want to get to, and their why may contribute to like their their journey to that, but like they just never really take the first step because it's scary, you know. For me, I was the opposite. It was always taking action without considering like where I was going. And it was, I don't know, doing that for so long, you hit burnout, you tend to, it's actually more isolating that way because you're not taking into consideration the results of everything you're doing, and you're not actually appreciating the outcome or the results. You're just kind of, I was just kind of moving. And I think I'm good at that. I'm good at taking action, like quick conception, bam, just get it done, figure it out. But I don't know, like, again, there's no wrong way to do it. It's just managing the expectation for how you're going to, you know, kind of move through it. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think that I do have a lot of admiration for people who spend more time being, you know, intrinsically like questioning their, you know, why or existence. But at the end of the day, it's like, you're not going to get an answer by sitting around. But,
right.
Yeah, but you're also going to hit a wall sometimes if you just constantly do stuff, and you know what I mean?
Because we've talked to other, you know, we've had other guests that started businesses, and it seemed like that was a common thing where even though they didn't really know exactly what they wanted to do, like just them starting something and taking action, like they kind of figured it out along the way. Like that was Johnny, Johnny Means. He started this whole like coffee cart business because he left his job, right? And then just kind of took off. So it's just interesting how that happens.
No, it's a good point, man. It's really, I think it's relative to the individual too. You know, like there's some people who can really follow through time after time after time, and then they discover, oh, I like this about my business, but I don't want to do that. And so the smart people are the ones who, as they say, surround themselves with smarter people. They put themselves in a room where they're like, oh, like I don't have all the answers, these people do, and I'm okay with like letting my ego die and doing that, and then bringing other people in who could facilitate the right solutions. Because once you figure out what drives you, like for me, I love my business. I love what we do, but the aspects of it that make me excited about it are really just integrating with my clients and getting them excited about their project. And the team we have, the people that work with us on all these projects, Paul upstairs running production for us, it's like he's good at it, and he just kind of took a really quick proficiency to it, and like I identified that, and so like anybody who I work with, I'm all about cultivating, what is it that drives you to, and then like incorporating that into the ecosystem of like how things are run and managed. But yeah, I mean, there are things that I hate doing.
Yeah,
it's like
for
that's
sure.
part of business.
Yes.
It's like you can hate it for long enough before you outsource it. But
Yes.
I'm a firm believer that if you have a business, you need to put yourself in every single driver's seat of that
Yeah,
business
me too.
as if you had to do it alone day after day after day
Yeah.
in order to appreciate it.
And you can't delegate well unless you do that.
Exactly.
And then like you can delegate things that if you say, oh, I hate this, and I'm not even going to learn it, and I'm going to delegate it. Number one, the person you delegate it to is not going to do a good job because you don't even know what a good job looks like. And number two, when they run into the roadblocks, you can't help them, and you're not going to be, like you said, as appreciative because you've never had to deal with the problems.
Exactly. Yeah, and you can't identify those things either, like, and that's a great point. Identifying it is because you've had to live through the challenges, and you're like, man, I mean, to be quite honest, I don't drink coffee. I won't even know where to start to make a cup of coffee, to be honest. Like that's the weirdest thing to say, but but there are those little things in your day to day where if I were going to hire somebody as an EA or something like that, like I want to be able to delegate certain tasks and understand how to articulate what it is that I need from that person. So if I do want a cup of coffee, be like, I don't want to be like, I was like, how does this thing work? And my executive assistant isn't here, so I got to like figure. No, that's maybe a terrible example, but I'm just trying to say that I've been the guy on the ladder. I've been, and I'm still plenty of times the guy with like the power drill and like cutting things and having to show the guys certain things and how it's executed.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I can't walk into a room and it's done wrong if I never told them how to do it to begin with and get upset and be like, what are you guys doing? You didn't understand this situation or like the concept of this. And I mean, that's just.
Well, with your delegation example, I mean, you've spent 10 years, right? Like as the guy, like an AV guy, right? And so you coming in and doing this, it's like you've already put in, you've put in the work, and then you mentioned you'll do the research too. And so it's like you're not jumping into this expecting to just throw people to the wolves. And then the way you cultivate, like you're literally cultivating talent in the sense that you're helping them find their kind of like mini why inside of your own business, and then you're building their skills for them. So like you're adding value in all these different ways. And you've mentioned value like several times. It seems like you have a really good understanding. Like even when you're pitching people the Soundshed Studio, it's like you have to understand what I bring to the table, or else you're gonna think I'm overpriced, you're gonna get upset. But you seem to have a really good grasp on value itself.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's always driven by people. It's not driven by the outcome or the object or the studio. You can spend twice the amount of money on a studio and have a terrible experience, and like the value is perceived as the experience, not the money you spent. And that's what it is. It's the integration of the connection with the experience that people look at, whether they have the money or they don't. And that's why certain people value their money more than their time. Because they're at a place where they don't have the luxury of saying, well, I have enough money. If this goes wrong, then like they only have that one shot to get it right with whoever they hire to do it. So for them, they value their money more because that's what's more important to them, because it's like, hey, like I want a studio. I only have this fixed budget, and I want to make sure I hire the right person who brings the most value, whether it's like in their pricing, and you can't get it all every time. But then when you get to that next echelon of people who are like, oh, money's not an object, their value is derived from, I don't want to have to interface with anybody.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to have to
Yes.
talk to you. I don't want to be talked to about technical things. Like, I just want this to be easy. I am paying you to do your job. And so those are kind of the two clients that you kind of work with to any degree. It's the client who says, this is what I have, this is all I can spend, and my value is based on not going over that budget. And if they have a terrible experience, but they still get the same outcome at the end, there's a little bit more grace there.
Mm-hmm.
But the ultra wealthy clients
Yeah.
who are like, don't this up,
Yeah.
because I'm paying you whatever your value to yourself is, and if you this up,
Yeah.
to them it's like, you made my life harder and I hired you to make it easier.
Right.
And that's a paradigm shift when you start to get into like wealth and building wealth. Is like, I realize the same thing. It's like, I value my time a lot more now, whereas like before I would work on my own car and like it was exciting to me, but then I'm like, man, if I do the things that, you know, I'm trying to save money with or whatnot, then like my business suffers, because that's an opportunity for me to have somebody else just kind of do those things for me. And it's not a matter of like, I don't want to get dirty, I don't want to do the work myself.
Exactly.
Like, I would love to spend every day just, you know, doing my car or going to the gym or, you know, whatever it is. But it's one of those things where I realize I have responsibilities now, and I think that's how wealthy people operate. I'm not saying all wealthy people.
Sure.
But, you know, people start to see value against time. And it's that monetary degree of separation between what am I getting, like how much easier is my life if I just pay for it to be easier, rather than me doing it myself. And is this person like making it easier, or are they a pain in my ass?
Yeah.
And that's one thing I've seen in sales with a lot of colleagues, where they kind of miss the mark. They want to ask too many questions. They want to over dictate, over analyze, over engineer. And yeah, it's a weird realization when you get into business. I've seen people post like, why don't clients value my time? Why do they go with the cheaper bid or blah blah blah? And it's like, it means you kind of suck at sales, man. Like, you kind of suck at client cultivation, and it's true.
Yes. Gosh, there's so much there we could talk about.
Well, how did you? Cause I mean, because your first client was Joe Rogan, right? So how did you come? Like, how did you come to the understanding, like this understanding of value or whatever? Like, was this like right after Joe Rogan having such a big client, like off the bat, was that like something you immediately just like understood? Like, oh, okay, if I just go after big clients who are just willing to drop however much money, right? Like, you just understood that, or
No,
did you have some clients that you regretted having?
It's a trained awareness. You have to spend time reading body language and just verbal cues and things like that. So that instance wasn't the first. That wasn't necessarily a singularity that like made me feel like I understood the client.
Okay, yeah.
The first interaction was, how do I put this? Not to get too cerebral with this, but like, as humans, we want to prove ourselves. Like, that's the first thing we want to do when we get into a room, is size up the other people. Like, our value is based on whether or not they perceive us as valuable. And so going into the room, strutting my knowledge and being like, well, this is the right way to do it, yada, yada. Like, rather than being excited for the project, I saw the problems first. And that's what I was highlighting in that social situation. And like, that I realized that quickly. Like, he didn't want to hear about anything technical, and I was like, okay, like I had already said what I said, and I thought I had lost the actual work myself, because I was like, oh, you know, I didn't tell him what he wanted to hear. I should have just, you know, told him I'd get it done. You know, whatever. That was
give him a handshake and
that was my stupid engineering brain. But I came from an industry where like you are having to be the biggest person in the room and have to be the smartest person in the room, because technology and AV isn't for everybody. And when they're like, oh, I don't want to spend money on this, then you have to explain to them, well, your IT is going to suffer, or this is going to suffer. So you have to like, it's almost, you have to kind of poke your chest out and be like, well, I'm the smart IT guy, blah, blah, blah. So like, I was just conditioned to do that. But the moment I realized how to navigate those conversations with more awareness was, I had this client in Croatia. So my second client actually wasn't Alex Hormozy. I take that back. My second client was this young guy lived in Croatia, or the project was in Croatia. I think he lived in Australia, or maybe New Zealand. I can't remember. And he reached out. He's like, I loved what you did for Joe, and I want to do this project in Croatia. Can you guys design it for me? And at this point, I started assembling my team and people I was working with, and I wanted to show off. I was like, I'm going to get all my guys on these Zoom calls. So there were like 6 of us
Oh my
on a Zoom
gosh.
call for no reason other than for me to be like, look, we're legit. And so we get on this Zoom call with this guy. His name was Matt too. And
Of course.
and he's telling me about his idea for the studio. And he wanted it to be underwater. Like an aquarium type of thing. Like
What?
a literal dome of glass with fish, real fish, like floating around. And
Wow.
That is sick idea.
I mean, that would be a sick studio.
that's what I should have said. That's not what I said.
Oh no.
And that's what I learned. That's when I learned. I was going back into this idea of like, this is gonna be terrible for us. It's gonna sound terrible. We're gonna have to trench all this concrete. How are we even gonna get cables and lights? And it was this whole thing of having leverage in the conversation to make him feel bad about his idea before even like rejoicing in it, like being this cool thing. And I remember we get off the call. He was ready, you know what I mean? He's like, this is the guy. I want to build the studio. But at the end of the call, I could see the apprehension in his face.
Ooh.
And I questioned myself that night. I couldn't sleep that night because I'm like, man, like, I thought I had it. Like, it was right there. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, I know what I did wrong. And I scheduled another call with him and maybe a couple of the team members. And we got on the call about 2 or 3 days later. And I was like, hey, Matt, I realize, like, I should have been more excited about this project with you. Like, we're invested in this, and this is really cool. I'm sorry if I, like, burst your bubble with that, but, like, we're going to figure this out. Let's do this together. Like, it's going to be challenging, but, like, we're going to be a team on this, and, like, what do you think? And he's like, send me the invoice. And
Wow.
and that was the moment I realized.
Matt the closer.
Yeah, that was the moment I realized what had happened. It's like I wasn't invested in the client. I was too worried about the challenges I was going to face and whether or not this was a good idea, and just not relishing in like his idea. And so we never finished that project. Like, I was right. I'm not going to say I was wrong. It was bad. It never went anywhere. I mean, we found one company in the entire world that was willing to take on this massive thing until we found out the room was so small that he was working with that it would have been impossible anyways.
Oh.
Dang.
So anyways, that became a dead project. Like, we made money off of it and went nowhere. And anyways, like, that's just intuition versus good client cultivation at that point. But
Wow. What a crazy story, though.
But that was,
Man.
and it's funny that we're talking about it. I haven't told that story in such a long time. I haven't really even given it much thought, but yeah, those are the things in the past 4 years that you have those interactions with people, and that's what I mean. You learn more about yourself if you're aware enough and you want to. Because had I just said, oh well, this guy, we're not going to work with him because his ideas are stupid, and like, like I could have had my ego about it and just been like, well, I just did Joe Rogan's studio and just walked away and moved on to the next client.
If anybody, you had the freaking clout to do that.
I had the leverage to do it, but I just it was really, again, I was just asking myself, what happened? Like, it was just like, that shouldn't have happened. Something just felt wrong, and having to swallow my pride and be like, I'm the problem. I was the problem in that situation.
That's self-awareness, though. So many people don't have that. They'll just keep like banging their head against the wall until. Have you ever read the book or heard of it, The E-Myth Revisited?
Mm-mm.
So it's this guy who tells a story, basically like on entrepreneurship and how people start their businesses. But he uses a story of this girl named Sarah, and she's a baker. She runs a baking shop, right? And she's an exquisite baker, amazing. Everyone walks by and says, "I love your cakes, your pies, everything about it. You're amazing. You should start a business." And so she does. And then, she finds herself working, instead of 9 to 5, she's working, double that or whatever, right? She's working 80 hours a week now. Yeah. And she's like, I thought starting my business was supposed to free me from the 9 to 5. Now I'm working more, and I don't like I'm not enjoying my craft anymore. And so he tells the story, he's like, as if he's talking to her and coaching her, and he's like, Sarah, what you have to understand is you're a technician right now, and you're a wonderful technician, but you're a really, really bad manager and visionary. And so that's the 3, right? It's technician, manager, and entrepreneur / visionary. And he's like, people can have a little bit of each, but most people have a lot of one.
Right.
And it sounds to me like you are a very, very good technician that over time has been humble enough to say, hey, I have this vision for something that I want to do. I see the opportunity. And then, oh shoot, now I got to learn how to manage people. You mentioned it earlier, like my gift is to say, I don't know how to do this. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to do it well. That's your gift, right? That's the technician's gift. I'm a terrible technician. I'm awful. I started building fences in my own little 1-2-man DBA construction company, fence company, before I ended up with the company I'm at now. And it would take me forever. Like I would do a good job, but then I would see other crews and I'm like, I can't compete with that.
Yeah.
Right. And then I got into project management and sales. I was like, okay, I'm a little bit better at this, but I still didn't like it. And then it was like, okay, now let me like learn marketing. Oh, okay, I like this a little bit more.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit better. And then it's like, okay, now try hiring and training and managing. I'm like, oh my gosh, I am so much better at managing than I am at sales or than I am at the technician. And I love what I love to do is the visionary aspect. And so that book helped me understand like, okay, I had to start as the technician to learn, and I had to go through the sales and the project management and the tough customers. And I've literally sanded someone's concrete driveway because our forklift delivery driver scraped to the bottom and got rust on their brand new driveway. Like I had to do that stuff.
Right.
And to now when I manage my guys, they're like, oh, I have this terrible customer. They're making me, I'm like, dude, I've sanded someone's driveway. I've been there, man. Like I've been in the trenches with you. And when you have a manager, I mean, I'd love to hear about your experience in the W-2 world, I guess, with IT and everything, because you've talked a little bit about that. But when you come from a space of not hearing your ideas heard, of dealing with the difficult customers, of not having your ideas listened to, and then all of a sudden you go from that place to being the guy, being the boss, and you're having the weights and responsibility, I think it gives you so much more value as a entrepreneur, because now, like you said, it's the whole delegation example. You understand what these people have gone through. And so even if they have an idea that you don't agree with, it's like, you know how to let them down easy without crushing their spirit.
Yeah. Working within parameters that you can't control makes it a little bit more difficult to be a visionary,
Yes.
And that's part of W-2. That's part of being the part, in the machine, if you will. But, I've had a manager is more than somebody who delegates, right? Like in some way they have to be a leader and as a mentor more than anything.
Yes. A good manager.
A good manager.
Yeah, a good one.
A good manager should be a mentor. And it's not a matter of like, you don't have to get super personal with your employees or have to get to a place where there's like this rapport that's, a mutual respect in a sense that, it's equal.
Sure.
A manager should be there because they've earned the right to serve, actually. More so than just to be a leader, but to also be able to say, what do you need and how can I set you up for success?
Interesting.
That's the wrong way to look at it is a hierarchy. That's not how this works. If that employee fails, the manager can fire them, but he's still under scrutiny from the person above him because it's like, it was your job. It was your role to make sure that person was successful. And it's all trickle down from there. So the way I look at it is like the managers I've had in my time as an employee failed me in the sense that, when I would come up with an idea or something, rather than fostering those things or actually being curious, it was more like, no, that's not how we do things here. And so that would create a reluctancy for me to want to go the extra mile. It's creating an environment where I no longer feel like I want to take the initiative because I know what I'm going to be met with resistance. Whether I'm right or wrong, like if you don't foster that curiosity in your employees or other people, it tends to have a long-standing effect. I've got this situation with even one of my guys. They're 1099, but there was a moment in time where one of them made a very big mistake, and he was under the purview of another company that we work with, and because of that mistake, the other company, the owner was very upset. And I had to talk him off the ledge because that employee or that 1090, that contractor, you know, I knew his personal situation. I knew he had a special needs kid at home, and like,
Yeah.
you know, the money that he makes does not equate to being able to cover the cost of a mistake like this. And I had to pull this other owner aside. And I said, look, man, we're pretty much everything here. We're the accountability here. We have the insurance. We have, you know, like if anything happened, then yes, he made a mistake. But understand, if you reprimand him for that mistake, he's going to do it again on accident, and he's never going to come to you with that mistake. Because he's going to be too afraid of having to pay for that mistake on the back end, and he can't afford it to begin with. So like the way you approach that is how a good manager should be able to say, okay, like, okay, let me be compassionate in this moment. Let me sit with this like frustration, and then let me actually be tactful about how I approach this. And I never experienced that in the W-2 world. I never had managers who were like, hey, I see your value. I want to cultivate that. What are you excited about? You know, what do you think you excel at? What do you want to try to learn? It was more or less like, here's your role. If you're afraid of ladders, don't be a you know what I mean? Like, it was like, oh, you don't know how to use a hole hog to drill holes in studs. Like, you know, like no one showed me how to do this stuff. It's that macho bravado of like, earn your stripes and like suffer in silence, and, you know, just don't be a baby. Don't be a whatever. And that's just like, I don't know. It's a lot of trauma, you know,
dude.
both inflicted
Freaking
and
sucks.
like the root of how we treat employment. And so my experience with W-2 has always been one of just not feeling like I was adequate enough to ever level up or climb the ranks like they say. And it's like, you can't climb the ranks if somebody else feels threatened that you're going to do something better than them.
Yes.
Or that you're going to
Very
provide
true.
more value than them. And
So
someone's going to
true.
identify that and say, hey, Joe, why aren't you doing your job? Because he did that in 30 minutes and it takes you 4 days to send an email. You know, like that's the reality of it. You know, people get comfortable. People decide that like they want to get complacent because they're not being held accountable for things. And over time, it just becomes normal. You know, like I know so many people who work in high pressure jobs that if they don't get something done in a certain timeline, they are reprimanded or just flat out fired because the next person's waiting in line for their job. And at the end of the day, it's like it creates this culture of two things. One, it's like fear that your job is always on the line. And then on the other side, the people who really don't want to like bring any value to the table. They just kind of get by every single day and they're like, oh yeah, I'm just going to do the bare minimum. And I also realized like even when I was pushing myself harder than I could have in a job, it was all about the perspective. For me, the perspective was, okay, well, what am I gaining out of this? I remember when I was doing home AV, I was crawling through attics. I was having to conquer my fear of ladders. I was doing like real hard manual labor. Literally digging trenches to run cabling to like people's pool and limestone.
Dang.
You know, like it was part of my job for 2 years. And I realized I was like, holy shit, I feel healthier than I ever have though. Like I'm like losing weight. I'm like starting to like feel physically so much better. And I'm learning a lot of cool different skills. And so I had to kind of change my perspective on like, you know, it was hard work and it sucked from day to day, but you know, it was going to suck anywhere else I went. You know what I mean? Like if my mind is stuck in that perpetual state of being, like I would always be running from the problems I identified as problems and not seeing them as opportunities. And so I was just like, okay, I'm just going to keep doing this. And eventually like I'm going to challenge myself to see what I can do. And then if my manager doesn't see that, you know, I mean, I got laid off from that job in favor of some guy who did meth on the job site constantly.
That. That's great.
And,
of course he outworked you.
Yeah, and it's like, and I'm looking at it as like, why did I get laid off when this guy's sleeping on the job site and doing drugs before work? And there's no reason. Like, I can't question that and be like,
Yeah.
oh, poor me, like, blah, blah, blah. I can't challenge it. It's like, it was what it was. Let me move on and do the next thing. And you know, if a manager's perception is self-preservation because their job pays
Yeah.
them well and whatnot, of course they're not going to want to cultivate excellence. They're not going to cultivate somebody who can outshine them.
Dude, that's so true.
You know,
Yeah.
so it's like, but can you imagine? Can you imagine that one person who's really cultivating that? Someone who's like mentoring everybody, and then your team is so much stronger, and you
Dude.
could have a place where like you're seeing increased revenue, you're seeing increased, you know, mental wellness, you're seeing increased performance, you know, and yeah, that's a lot easier than we make it out to be. But
It is.
Yeah.
it's just ego, man.
It's crazy.
Dude, I literally at my job now, I see managers, like dudes above me, have literal meltdowns because someone below them has an idea, like literally just an idea that will probably work better than theirs. And these dudes literally have like full on meltdowns. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, that's not gonna work because of this and that, whatever. And they just freak out because that's true. Like they feel threatened. Like, oh, as soon as I don't seem as valuable anymore, then like my job's on the line.
Yeah.
So
Then be more valuable, you know?
yeah.
So, gosh, what you're saying is so interesting. I really want to hear about where you learned that switch between service versus hierarchy, because what I'm experiencing right now with my fencing company is I have these two like superstars, pretty much like top fence salesmen in Texas on the residential side, who we recruited from the biggest competitor in the state, and that happens to be in Austin. And they came from they were the first two founding salesmen that the owner hired.
Yeah.
And they they were there for almost a decade, and you know how top salesmen are, right? They're
Yeah.
kind of psychos, and that's why they're top salesmen. And so I'm learning that they came from a very, very toxic environment where it was very much a lot of what you're describing, very macho. And so it's been very odd for me as, you know, in my 20s, right? These guys are in their late 40s and 50s. And so it's been really, really odd for me to like, number one, like manage them. It's a really weird relationship, but also like showing them that, hey, it's okay. Like, it's okay. You're not, like, I'm not going to get upset at you or fire you or
Yeah.
just like, you can talk to me. And it's really cool. I got like one of the biggest compliments I felt from one of my guys does like professional barbecue smoking on the side and like legit wins grandmaster competitions. He's insane. His pulled pork is like ridiculous. Anyway, he was like, you know, at this other company, I never hung out with anybody. Like, I just didn't. They're mostly remote, whatever. But he's like, you know, I told one of my buddies that he's like, it's not like that over here. Like, I would legit hang out with these guys.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's like, hey, I'm starting to build that culture of like, when they have a problem, they can come to me. They can be mad. They can be upset, right? They can come to me with ideas, and if I shoot them down, it's with grace.
Yeah.
And so I'm starting to see what you're describing of how that healthy atmosphere, it compounds in a way, almost like compound interest, but it's like compound relational equity, where they're now, it's like they want to be here. Even if they got a job offer that's, you know, more money, sometimes they're like, I don't know, you know, I like this place. I'm safe here. So I say all that to say, I'm really curious where you learned that shift between service versus hierarchy.
Man, when I started this company, I didn't want that.
The hierarchy?
I didn't want hierarchy. You know, I've never expressed that somebody works for me. You know, because this doesn't work without them. You know?
Yeah.
And so, like, the idea behind that is antiquated. We spend a lot of time deciding that, you know, there's a level of, how do I put this? There's a level of value based on what the task is, and that's placed against a salary, or whether somebody's expendable, or whether somebody has the value you need to be sustainable in your company. You know, there are other tenets in building a company that are more important than proficiency. And a lot of people don't realize that.
Can you expound on that?
If I hire somebody who is smarter than me, I have to know that person has the right intentions and is bought into the mission of what we're actually doing, or it means nothing. If that person is, a 20-year veteran in AV and they come in and make it more complicated for my clients, or they can't understand what we're trying to achieve, there's no value there for me. It makes it like, because ultimately that value has to be transposed to what my client is trying to articulate their needs are. And if somebody comes in and thinks they know better, or they're ego driven, or, you know what I mean, I value loyalty over proficiency any day. Because proficiency is just somebody who did something long enough that they were interested in, that just like took it and just, but because you're proficient, you're very, very like stuck in one way of doing things most of the time. And there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, in every industry. But if you don't have somebody who's like really bought into the mission, and then they're like, cool, I also see the vision and I want to be a part of this, and you can invest in them too, then yeah, like what's the point of having somebody who's really good, who's an asshole that nobody wants to hang out with, or, is always rubbing people the wrong way. And then we have companies who tend to justify that. Well, he has all the IP, he knows everything about the company, like we can't get rid of him, like you just got to deal with him. And it's just this weird thing, man. It's like, what do we value as a society? What do we value as business owners? Like, if you value the rush of increased revenue month after month, and like you want to have $100 million, $200 million exit at the end of this, and that's like your path to success, everything else becomes irrelevant. Loyalty, good intentions, integrity, all that stuff to you becomes irrelevant, because the outcome to you doesn't matter how you get there. You just see that outcome. And that's more common than not. But for me, I knew it was important to surround myself with people that like I could genuinely take an investment into and say, look, like I'm going to be transparent about our finances. I'll be transparent about when we're struggling as a company. Like that vulnerability in itself creates trust and creates rapport. And you get so many people who want to compartmentalize things in a way that makes people feel like, well, what is Matt doing behind the scenes? Like what is his real intent with this? Yada. And so like I encourage just having like those vulnerable conversations. It doesn't mean that we're always going to be friendly. It doesn't mean that we're always going to be friends. It means that like there's trust, that like if somebody says, hey, I'm having a problem with this, that because of my responsibility owning this company, I have to find a solution to accommodate that reasonably, right? Like I've had people who abuse how accommodating I can be or how giving I can be, and I can identify that quickly. So I have to decide what my threshold is for that.
Yeah.
So it's like it's that give and take. It's that power. It's not even a power dynamic. It's just dancing with your own expectations and like who you are.
And boundaries too.
And boundaries, exactly. So yeah, I don't agree with people who only hire or build their company structure around like, we just want the best of the best. It's like, okay, yeah, but what happens when they get a better job offer? Someone just pays them more. They're off, dude.
They're
like,
gone.
They're gone.
Yeah.
And and if you can find a way to like make that work for everybody and like make it, then do it. You want to retain your talent.
Gosh, that's so.
But
it's like sage advice. I want to be just cognizant of your time, but I do have this one last question. If you could go back to Matt at 21, 22 in that studio, what would be your advice to him?
Why are you doing this? Yeah, I don't know. My advice would have to be learning how to navigate failure better. Identifying like how I felt in those moments where I was feeling inadequate, and spend more time, like sitting with that and be like, okay, like this isn't failure, this is evolution. And I think that was the hardest thing for me to get over, was that my failures were just the lesson I needed to get to that next stage of what I was trying to accomplish, and not using that as a way to self-sabotage and be like, well, I couldn't do this, so like why would I even start the next thing, and yada yada. So it's like I would still do it, but like just taking more time. and spending, time considering how I felt about things.
Like being more introspective.
Introspective, spending more time with like the intention behind what I was doing and whether or not it was going to be at the end what I expected it to be, because you get to the end of the road and you're kind of like, oh, I bought that new car, I bought that new thing, and like, I thought I'd feel better than this, So yeah, just spending more time, being more introspective and being like, okay, how do I feel about this first before I just dive into it, So that'd probably be my advice.
What instrument did you play?
Guitar.
Guitar, man.
Oh, nice, dude.
Yeah.
Same.
I was Dave Navarro, bro.
Oh,
I
shit.
don't think you guys know who Dave Navarro is.
I don't.
No.
That's sick that you got the tour though. Like
That is
pretty cool.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it was small stuff. Nothing too crazy. But,
Was that like in the Austin area or?
yeah, all over Texas, Oklahoma, stuff like that. Nothing too
I mean, you must have been pretty good.
Yeah, we did pretty well. I was in a bunch of different bands. Paul played in a bunch of bands.
Paul looks like he's freaking shredded in some bands.
Paul shreds, dude.
Paul
Heck yeah,
freaking
dude.
shreds.
Paul shreds.
Yeah. That's cool.
Do you have anything else you wanna?
No, I thought that was solid.
That was
dude.
fire. We have a lot of our listeners are between the ages of like 22 and like 32, and so, we're really interested, and so are we. And so like we're really interested in that kind of that stage, and it's really cool to see how you developed out of that, and now you're a father and a successful business owner and all this stuff. I think a lot of times from our perspective and our audience perspective, you're kind of looking out into like what's my life going to be, where am I going to make my mark, and it can be daunting, especially with social media, and you're seeing all these people that are more successful than you every day. Like you're being reminded of your inconsistencies.
But are they? That's the problem.
That's the problem.
But are they?
But on the surface, it looks like.
Yeah.
And so it's just, it can be very overwhelming.
Yeah.
To kind of, I guess, be hopeful that what I'm doing right now is the right thing, or the value I'm learning in this skill or in this company, like someone that's reinvesting in me, it's going to be worth it, even if I'm not making what I want to make right now, or whatever they're at. It's just sometimes I realize that we just our generation just needs a little bit of hope. We just need a little bit of hope that we can do it.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you sharing your story. Thank you so much. It blessed
in
me.
your space.
In your
everything.
space.
Yeah. Thank you so much, dude.
I mean, we were definitely indebted to you. So thank you so much.
Cool. All right.
If you have a bunch of money and you want a studio, then contact Matt. And if you don't waste his time. All right. Cool. No, but for real, Matt's awesome. So if you're someone you think that you're his ideal customer and you won't waste his time, hit him up. Thank you so much for being on, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Second Floor Experience. Peace.
I want to talk to you. Not now. Later. No, now.